What happens when the owner of a theme park chain goes undercover and finds an employee yelling at a visitor? It was almost 8 years ago when Julian Granger bought the struggling chain of 16 amusement parks scattered across the Midwest. Back then, they were rundown relics: poor food, long lines, rides constantly breaking down. He cleaned up the operations, poured millions into repairs, and hired a new executive team. The numbers bounced back quickly, but lately, the complaints had started creeping in again. Julian sat in his downtown Chicago office, flipping through a folder of recent customer emails. "We waited in line for the Ferris wheel for 40 minutes, only to be told it was closed with no explanation. Staff was rude, especially around the food court. No shade, no seating, and no one seemed to care." He rubbed his eyes. The district manager kept assuring him things were under control. But these messages told a different story, and he hated second-hand answers. Julian had never met most of the front-line workers. The company was too big now, and he didn't do the rounds like he used to. That bothered him more than he liked to admit. He took a breath, then stood up. "I'm going out there," he said out loud to himself. The next morning, Julian arrived at the smallest park in the chain, Maple Hills Adventure Park, just outside Joliet. It was a weekday, school was still out for summer, and the place was already buzzing by 10. He wore a faded red polo shirt, khakis, and a ball cap. No Rolex, no designer shoes. He even added a fake name tag, Tom's Seasonal Staff. His beard had grown in over the past week, and with the sunglasses, no one gave him a second glance. He hadn't met any of the employees here personally, so there was no risk of recognition. He reported to the staff entrance quietly. Inside, the employee break area smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. A thin guy in his early 20s leaned against the vending machine, half asleep. "You Tom?" asked a woman in a green supervisor polo. "Yeah," Julian replied, keeping his voice low. "All right, we're short today." "You're gonna shadow Kyle out in concessions. He's already out there." She didn't even ask for ID. Julian followed a map and found the food stand near the carousel. Kyle, a stocky guy with a crooked visor and a mountain of fries in front of him, didn't even look up when Julian walked in. "You knew?" Kyle asked, mouth full of something. "Yeah, just started." Kyle tossed him an apron. "Just keep the drinks filled and don't screw up orders. If someone complains, send them to me." The next hour passed in a blur of soda, nachos, and sweat. Kids screamed. Teenagers flirted. Parents looked exhausted. Kyle barely spoke unless it was to bark out orders or sigh dramatically. Twice he rolled his eyes at customers who asked for extra napkins. Julian kept his head down, observing. Around noon, a young woman with a toddler walked up to the window. "Hi, do you have anything that's dairy-free?" "My son has an allergy." Kyle didn't even look at her. "It's all on the sign." "I read it," she said politely, "but it doesn't say if the cheese is real or it's cheese. Of course it's got dairy," he snapped. "If your kid's allergic, maybe don't bring him to a theme park." Julian froze. The woman's face dropped. She looked stunned. Her son, maybe 4, tugged at her hand, confused. "I'm just trying to keep him safe," she said quietly. Kyle waved her off. "Yeah, well, you're holding up the line." Julian stepped forward. "Hey, I got this," he said to Kyle, then leaned out the window. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about that. There are fruit cups in the cooler to the left and bottled water. No dairy." "They're not on the menu, but they're there." She gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." When she walked away, Julian turned back and looked at Kyle. "You really talk to people like that all day," Kyle shrugged. "Some people are just stupid." Julian clenched his jaw but said nothing. Not yet. By 2, Julian had seen enough. Trash cans overflowing. A ride operator wearing headphones. A family yelling at the guest services counter because they'd been given wrong ride height info. But what pushed him over the edge came near the arcade. A teenage boy, maybe 17, tried to exchange tokens for a prize that looked a bit too expensive for what he had. "You need 200 tickets for that one," said the worker behind the counter. "I have 170, the boy replied. The employee, a tall guy with dyed blonde hair and a name tag that read Ricky, scoffed. Then go find 30 more. What do you want me to lie for you? The boy looked embarrassed. I just thought you thought wrong. This isn't charity, dude. A woman near the claw machines turned around. Excuse me, that's my son. You don't have to be rude. Ricky stepped out from behind the counter. Lady, I'm not being rude, I'm being honest. If you don't like it, you can go cry about it somewhere else. Julian watched from a few feet away. The mom's face turned red. People were starting to look. The boy looked like he wanted to disappear. Hey, Julian said sharply, stepping in. That's enough. Ricky turned to him. Who are you? Someone who doesn't like seeing guests treated like trash. Ricky sneered. You don't work in this section, mind your business. Julian held his gaze. You just made it my business. There was silence. The mom took her son's hand and walked away. Julian followed them outside. Ma'am, he said gently, I'm really sorry about what happened. That wasn't right. She looked surprised. You're not like the rest of them. He smiled a little. I'm not. He went back toward the arcade, heart pounding. Enough was enough. He needed to talk to the manager. And then he was going to reveal exactly who he was. Julian stepped into the staff hallway behind the arcade, still wearing the red polo that had started to stick to his back. The clatter of game machines faded behind him, replaced by the low hum of vending machines and the thump of someone dragging a mop down the corridor floor. A security guard leaned against the wall near the break room, talking into a radio. Julian walked past without slowing, glancing at a laminated directory until he found what he was looking for. Park Operations Office, second floor. The narrow staircase creaked as he climbed. The second floor overlooked the park entrance through tinted windows. The office door was propped open with a clipboard wedged under it. Inside, a woman in a navy dress shirt was leaning over a desk, typing with one hand, holding a phone to her ear with the other. No, I understand that, but we can't refund for weather, she said. It's posted at every gate. Right, well, ma'am, I'm not raising my voice, I'm just ma'am. Okay, I'm ending the call now. She hung up without waiting for a reply and glanced up, her expression tight. You lost, Julian stepped in. Looking for the park manager, you in charge? I'm the assistant manager, William's out today. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shut the door behind him and took off his sunglasses. My name's Julian Granger. The woman blinked. Wait, Julian Granger, I own this place, he said, voice calm. And I've been working here undercover since this morning. She stood up slowly, her chair squeaking. What? I've seen enough in 4 hours to know we've got a serious problem. She crossed her arms, clearly trying to regain control of the moment. Okay. Look, I don't know what you think you saw, but this park runs on a skeleton crew most days. We've been short-staffed all summer. Everyone's doing double duty. That doesn't explain the way customers are being talked to, Julian said, or how your staff is treating each other. Or how the trash overflowed by noon. She opened a drawer and pulled out a schedule. We've got 2 janitors covering the entire park. One called out sick, the other's been here since 5 this morning. That's part of the problem, Julian said, but it's not the whole story. She didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to the door behind him, like she was hoping someone else would walk in and take over. How long has William been the general manager here? Julian asked. Since last year. And how often is he out? Fridays, usually. He says it's his admin day. Works from home, Julian nodded once. Does he ever walk the park? I think so, not lately. Julian stepped closer. What's your name, Carly? You seem like you're doing everything yourself. Carly hesitated, then let out a breath. It feels that way, yeah. Julian looked around the office. Nothing on the whiteboard was newer than 2 weeks old. A stack of unopened supply boxes was shoved against the wall. A dusty fan oscillated in the corner, barely cutting through the warm air. I'm not here to make your job harder, Julian said, but I'm not going to ignore what's happening. I need to talk to every department head still on site. Carly rubbed her forehead. That's okay, I'll get who I can. Start with maintenance, then rides, then security. She picked up the phone. By the time the first department lead arrived, Julian had changed out of the red polo and into a plain button-up he kept in his car. He wanted the staff to see him clearly now, not as a temp. A man named Curtis came in first head of maintenance. Mid-50s, heavy boots, an oil-stained shirt. He looked tired but alert. Julian gestured to the chair across from him. "Curtis, right?" "Yeah, how's your department holding up?" Curtis scratched his chin. "We're down 3 techs. One left for a factory job last month, 2 others never came back after Memorial Day weekend. Haven't been able to replace him. We patch what we can." "Do you have what you need in terms of parts? Support from management?" Curtis hesitated. "We get ignored unless something breaks in front of guests. Otherwise, I send requests and don't hear back." Julian leaned forward. "What about safety issues?" Curtis looked him in the eye. "There are rides that should have been shut down for full inspections. We do what we can to keep them running, but it's not ideal. We've been told to prioritize throughput." Julian's jaw tightened. "Told by who?" Curtis didn't answer right away. "Curtis," he finally said. "William." Julian nodded once. "Thank you. You'll be hearing from me again soon." Next came the security supervisor, a thin man named Darren who looked like he hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. He carried a clipboard covered in incident logs. "I've got a staff of 8 rotating shifts," Darren said. "We're supposed to have 12 minimum. When we're short, I have to cover the front gate myself." Julian glanced at the log. "Any recent incidents involving staff and guests?" Darren flipped to a page near the back. 4 days ago, a kid got shoved near the bumper cars. Staff said it was another kid, but the mom claimed a ride op pushed him. No cameras in that section." Julian pointed at the page. "Was it investigated?" Darren sighed. "I asked William. He said it'd create liability if we dug into it, told me to log it as inconclusive and move on." Julian closed the folder. "Understood." The last department head to come in was a woman named Teresa, head of rides. She wore a faded staff polo and had a clipboard tucked under one arm. Her hands were stained with grease. "How many operators do you have today?" Julian asked. 4 short. I pulled 3 from games just to keep the coasters running." "Are they cross-trained?" "Barely. I had to train them myself." Julian folded his arms. "Who sets the daily assignments?" "William signs off, but he hasn't been in the control room all week." "Are the ride logs up to date?" She nodded. "I make sure of it." Julian's tone softened. "That's good to hear." Teresa shifted slightly. "We're trying, sir, but when people quit, no one replaces them. We're just expected to keep going." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "That's going to change." She didn't say anything else, just gave a subtle nod and left. Carly returned once the last lead was gone. "That's everyone still on site." Julian stood. "I need to speak to William in person. Can you get him here?" She hesitated. "He doesn't usually answer unless it's an emergency." "Then call it one." Julian waited in the office, arms crossed, staring out the tinted window at the crowds below. The sun was starting to drift west, casting long shadows across the pavement. From here it looked like a normal day. Kids running between rides, parents sipping sodas, music playing from hidden speakers. But he knew better now. Carly returned 20 minutes later. "He's on his way." Julian nodded. "Good." He turned back to the window, watching as a family struggled to find a shaded bench. A food wrapper blew across the walkway. A ride op leaned against a railing, looking half asleep. It wasn't just about one bad employee or a rude comment. The park had drifted, and now everything was about to change. William arrived just past 3. He parked in the employee lot and walked in through the side entrance near the maintenance bay, his sunglasses still on and his phone in hand. His shirt was untucked, tie missing, and he had the half-alert look of someone who hadn't expected to be called in. He glanced around the second-floor office, clearly confused by the gathering of department heads near the hallway. Julian watched from inside the office and stepped out when William reached the top of the stairs. "William," he said, voice level. William looked over, his brow furrowing. "Yeah," Julian didn't raise his voice. "I'm Julian Granger. I own this park." William blinked, then gave a short laugh, assuming it was a joke. Okay, sure, wait, you're serious? I spent the day working here under another name. Now I'd like you to come into the office. William glanced instinctively at Carly, who stood at the end of the corridor, arms at her sides. She didn't say anything. Inside, Julian closed the door and motioned toward the chair across from him. William sat down slowly, his posture defensive. If this is about the payroll delay last month, I've already submitted an explanation to corporate. This isn't about payroll, Julian cut in. This is about how this park is being run under your leadership. William looked down, then back up. You're going off one day's experience? I'm going off what I saw, what I heard, and what your staff confirmed. William leaned back, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Look, I know it's not perfect, but we're understaffed. Everyone is. It's a seasonal business. Julian nodded once. You've been managing this site for over a year. You've had time to build a stable team. William gave a shrug. There's only so much I can do when people don't want to work. Julian folded his hands. That's not what I've heard. I've spoken to every department head still on site. You haven't been doing ride checks. You haven't followed up on guest incidents. You've been telling maintenance to prioritize appearances over safety. You've been off-site on days listed as workdays. William opened his mouth to respond, but Julian raised a hand. I saw 2 separate incidents today where guests were spoken to with open contempt. One of them involved a mother trying to protect her son from a food allergy. She was mocked. That happened under your watch. William's tone shifted. That's not acceptable. I'll talk to the food manager. You're the manager, Julian snapped. That responsibility doesn't fall on someone else. William's posture stiffened. You think I'm not trying? Do you know how many hours I've put in over the last year? How many times I've stayed late because someone didn't show up or left their post? Julian stood. You being present once in a while doesn't absolve the fact that your staff is operating without support. You've created a culture where the minimum is tolerated and the worst behavior goes unchecked. William didn't stand. He looked down at the floor, jaw clenched. Julian took a breath. You're being relieved of your duties, effective immediately. William looked up, face flushing. You're firing me. We'll arrange a formal transition. You'll have a chance to speak with HR, but yes, you're done here. William stood slowly, still processing. You don't get what it's like trying to keep this place afloat with half a crew and no budget increases. I do. I built this company from the ground up. I've worked those same shifts. I know exactly what it takes. And I know when someone stopped caring. William didn't argue after that. He left the office without another word. Julian waited until he was gone before stepping back into the hallway. Carly was still there, her expression unreadable. You're the acting GM now, Julian said. Effective today. Her eyes widened. Wait, I will sort out the paperwork later. Right now, I need you to meet with the department heads again. We're going to do this the right way. She nodded, still stunned. Okay, start with Curtis and Teresa. I'll join you in 20 minutes. Julian stayed behind for a moment, looking over the park from the second-floor window. The light was starting to fade, casting long gold streaks through the trees beyond the food court. A few guests were leaving early, fanning themselves with park maps. One of the arcade attendants was wiping down a counter. For the first time all day, Julian felt something shift. Downstairs, Carly gathered the leads in the small conference room by the break area. Teresa sat with her arms crossed, Curtis leaned against the wall, and Daron stood near the door, quietly observing. I know this has been a rough run, Carly said. But we've got a chance to turn it. Curtis spoke first. Depends on what kind of support we're actually getting. You're getting it, Julian said, stepping in. Starting with more hands. He set a clipboard on the table. We're authorizing temporary staffing from the regional float team. You'll have 5 extra pairs of hands by next week. That doesn't fix everything, but it's a start. Teresa looked skeptical. And who's going to train them? We're already behind. I'll be here for the next few weeks, Julian replied, not just observing, working. You'll have help, Daron finally spoke. What about accountability? If someone crosses a line with a guest, what happens now? Julian turned to him. We're implementing a direct reporting system, no more burying complaints. If someone's out of line, it's documented and dealt with. Curtis glanced at Carly. You're really stepping in, Carly gave a measured nod. I am. And I'll back you if you're doing the right thing, Julian added. And if someone's not pulling their weight, they won't be here long. Teresa unfolded her arms. What about equipment? I've got ride controls overdue for inspection. You'll get the new panel boards by the end of next week. I've already approved the order, and we'll bring in a third-party inspector to do a full audit. No more patch jobs. Curtis looked at him for a long moment. You're serious? Julian met his eyes. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Later that evening, Julian walked the park grounds again, this time without the disguise. A few workers recognized him quietly and gave small nods. The arcade was calmer. Ricky, the employee who had insulted the teenager earlier, was nowhere to be seen. He'd been suspended pending review. Near the carousel, Julian saw the same woman from earlier, the one with the toddler. She was sitting on a bench, her son playing with a small toy. When she looked up and recognized him, her expression turned cautious. Julian approached slowly. Hey. I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry for how you were treated earlier. She nodded, still wary. I didn't expect anyone to care. I do, and I'm making sure the people who work here do too. She looked down at her son, who had stopped to sip from a juice box. He just wanted to ride the train. I didn't think it would turn into a thing. Julian sat on the edge of the bench. It shouldn't have. You were right to speak up. She gave a faint smile. Most places, when you complain, they just nod and move on. Not this place. Not anymore. She looked at him for a long second, then gave a quiet nod and stood. I hope you mean that. I do. As she walked off with her son, Julian stayed seated for a moment. The music from the carousel drifted through the air, soft and familiar. A ride operator waved a group of kids onto the next cycle. For the first time all day, the rhythm of the park felt steady. He wasn't here to play boss. He was here to rebuild trust, and he knew that wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen. The following Monday morning, Julian arrived at Maple Hills before the sun had fully risen. The lot was still half empty. Dew clung to the windows of the ticket booths, and the only sounds were the low buzz of overhead lights and the distant whine of a pressure washer near the maintenance shed. He stepped into the staff hallway, now cleared of the clutter he'd seen days earlier. Carly had stayed late Sunday night to organize a proper command board for the day's operations. Julian had watched her do it without being asked. He passed Darron near the security office, who gave a silent nod and handed him a list of incidents from the weekend. There were fewer than before, and none involved staff misconduct. They'd implemented a new rotation system for guest services, with one person assigned to walk the park hourly, logging conditions and guest concerns in real time. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was working. At 7:15, Julian met with the ride and food service leads in a small tented area behind the main concessions. Teresa stood with a clipboard tucked under one arm, mouth set in a focused line. Kyle, the concessions worker from last week, sat on a plastic bin facing the table, arms folded. His demeanor was different now, less dismissive, more guarded. Julian looked across at Kyle. You've been asked to meet before your shift. Do you understand why? Kyle nodded slowly. Because of what happened on Friday. You've been spoken to by Carly already? Yeah. She gave me the write-up and the suspension warning. Julian leaned on the table. You've been here 2 seasons. You know how policies work. But this isn't about rules on paper. It's about how people get treated. Kyle looked down. I was tired. I didn't think it mattered that much. It always matters, Julian said. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to respect the people who walk through those gates. Kyle let out a short breath. I get that now. I don't want to lose the job. I need it. You're not being let go. But you'll be reassigned to restocking for the next 2 weeks. No direct guest interaction. If you handle that right, we'll revisit your role. Kyle looked surprised. Okay, yeah, that's fair. Julian nodded to Teresa, who motioned for Kyle to follow her toward the distribution dock. Once they were gone, Carly joined him under the tent, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You didn't have to be here this early," she said, handing him one. "I wanted to see how the changes feel before the crowds hit." Carly pulled a small notepad from her pocket. "We've got 5 float hires coming this week. 1 on Tuesday, the rest staggered through Friday. HR's short, so onboarding's going to be split between me and Teresa." "You've got coverage for that," she nodded. We shuffled the opening crew. "I'll take over operations briefing and she'll run the training hour." Julian sipped the coffee. "You've stepped into this fast." "I didn't plan on it," Carly said. "But once I saw what was really going on, I couldn't let it slide back." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the sound of gates unlocking in the distance. The air smelled faintly of wet concrete and fryer oil. Julian broke the quiet. "I'm setting up a permanent rotation. 1 week every quarter I'll work in a frontline role at one of the parks, not as a show, just to stay sharp." Carly raised an eyebrow. "That going to look good on your calendar?" "I don't care if it does." She gave a slight nod. "Then I think it's the right call." At 8:30, Julian walked the east side of the park with Darron and one of the new security hires, a woman named Phyllis who'd previously worked in crowd control for a music venue. She carried herself with quiet confidence and had already flagged 2 bottleneck zones she thought needed stanchions before noon. Julian listened closely as she explained her reasoning, then approved the change on the spot. By noon, the park was in full swing. Julian had stationed himself near the western picnic zone, checking on a recently repaired fountain that had been dry since June. Curtis had personally overseen the valve replacement Sunday evening. It was running now, and a handful of kids were throwing pennies into the basin while their parents unpacked snacks nearby. Julian found Teresa near the carousel, tightening a panel on the operator's booth. She looked up when she saw him. "Control board for the tilt a skater came in this morning," she said. "We're installing it tonight after close." "Good," Julian said. "You've been keeping on top of everything." "I'm trying not to leave anything open-ended. Too many loose pieces around here." He studied the carousel as it turned slowly, music drifting from the speakers. "You ever want to move into a higher role?" Teresa gave a low chuckle. "You offering or just asking?" "I'm asking, but I'm thinking about the next few months. If we're going to rebuild leadership inside this park, I want people who live the problems, not just talk about them." She slid the wrench into her back pocket. "If you're serious, I'll think about it. But I don't want a title that means sitting in an office all day." "Then we'll make sure it doesn't," Julian said. She nodded once, then walked toward the coaster entrance to check a sensor flag. Julian watched her go, then turned back toward the guest path. At 2:30, he met again with Carly in the back office. She had a printed spreadsheet of daily surveys taken from the guest feedback kiosks. "The numbers are moving," she said. "Not dramatic yet, but the comments are less angry, more neutral, a few even positive." Julian scanned the page. "This one says the lady in the purple shirt helped my daughter when she got dizzy. She was really kind. Who was wearing purple today?" "Games staff. That'd be Maya. She's part-time but solid. Give her an extra break this week and a meal comp." Carly made a note. Julian leaned back slightly in the chair. "You think we'll hold this momentum?" "If we don't burn people out again," she said. "We need to keep the hires coming, keep communication open, and we have to follow through on what we promise. That's it. Simple. Not easy." "Exactly." They sat for a moment, the hum of the air conditioning filling the quiet. Julian spoke again. "When I first bought these parks, I thought fixing rides and repainting signs would be the hard part. Turns out it's keeping the mission intact." Carly looked over. "And what is the mission?" "Giving families a place where they feel safe, welcomed, and treated like they matter. That's it. If the staff doesn't feel that way, neither will the guests." She tapped her pen lightly against the desk. "Then we've got a shot." "Because people here want that to be true." Julian stood. "Let's make sure it stays that way." As the sun began to dip behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the midway, Julian walked the park one last time. A group of teenagers laughed near the bumper cars, an older couple shared a funnel cake under a shaded awning, and a ride op helped a child fasten a harness with practiced care. There were still rough edges. Staffing gaps hadn't vanished. Training was still behind in some areas. But the tone, the way people looked at each other, the way staff approached guests, it had shifted. Not by luck. By intention. Julian passed the arcade and saw the prize shelf had been rearranged. Items were now clearly labeled, and a new chart helped kids understand what they could afford without embarrassment. A small laminated sign above the counter read, "We're here to help you play." He paused, then kept walking. By the time he reached the front gates, the crowd had thinned. The air was cooler. Someone had turned on the lights lining the main path, and they flickered gently above the trees. Julian stepped outside, stood on the pavement, and looked back at the gate. This park wasn't perfect. But now, it was finally moving in the right direction.